members, let us take a moment to acknowledge the history of this land we call Brookline. This is the unceded land of the Massachusetts people whose traditions, language, and stewardship continue today through their lineal descendants, the Massachusetts tribe of Ponkapog. Today, we are living on the land that was taken by force. By 1641, the colonists in Brookline had allocated to themselves almost all the land that had been inhabited by Indigenous people. Land was not the only form of theft that occurred. Lives were also stolen. Historical records state that in 1675, during King Philip's War, 7 Indigenous men were sold into slavery in the Caribbean by residents of the area that we now call Brookline. The 7 men represent part of the early slave trade. Slavery in Brookline continued and grew, but soon those enslaved were African or of African descent. By 1746, enslavers claimed ownership of over half of Brookline land. We acknowledge the theft of land, culture, and lives, and the ensuing enslavement of Indigenous and African peoples that occurred here. These early policies set the stage for centuries of systemic racism. As we remember these atrocities, town meeting members and the larger town must commit to ourselves to address the ongoing inequities that are the result of our history of colonialism and racism. Although we as individuals were not perpetrators, sorry, of these atrocities, we benefit from these systems. Thus, we dedicate ourselves to addressing them today. Good evening, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Felina Silva Robinson, and I am the chair of the Indigenous Peoples Day Celebration Committee. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to share a poem with you that I wrote with regards to climate. It's called Dear Mother Earth, I'm Sorry. There were so many promises made and forgotten. We see your despair. Your tears slither slowly through the cracks of the mountaintops. You glare down upon what you created, and you see all that we did wrong. We now must fix our mistakes before it's too late. We hope you still feel we are worth saving. We do anything to have your forgiveness. Please don't strip the earth and leave us bare, nor leave us beyond repair. We are certain that greater things will come the next time around. Dear Mother Earth, I'm sorry. In honor of Native American Heritage Month, we would like to present you with tonight's conversation on climate. We will start with a 20-minute video by Julian Agawam, who is a Chamorro human rights lawyer and defender, and author from Guam. He is the founder of Blue Ocean Law, an international law firm based in Guam, specializing in human and indigenous rights, self-determination, and environmental justice in the Pacific. Mr. Agawam has written a book entitled No Country for Eight-Spot Butterflies, which is a part memoir, part manifesto. This book is a collection of essays on resistance, resilience, and collective power in the age of climate disaster, and a call for justice for everyone, but in particular for Indigenous peoples. Embracing poetry and compelling prose, Agawam weaves together stories from his childhood in the villages of Guam with searing political commentary about matters ranging from the nuclear weapons of global warming. Undertaking the work of bearing witness, wrestling with the most pressing questions of the modern day, and reckoning with the challenge of truth-telling in an era of rampant effusion. He calls from his own life experiences, from losing his father to pancreatic cancer, to working for Mother Teresa, to an edifying chance encounter with Sherman Alexie, to illuminate a collective path out of the darkness. a powerful, bold new voice writing at the intersection of Indigenous rights and environmental justice. Julian Agawam is entrenched in the struggles of the people of the Pacific to liberate themselves from colonial rule, defend their sacred sites, and obtain justice for generations of harm. In No Country for Eight-Spot Butterflies, Agawam shares his wisdom and reflections on love, grief, joy, and triumph, and extends an offer to join him in a hard-earned hope for a better world. We will share a couple of links in the chat, as well as include them in our Twitter and our Facebook. If you are interested in purchasing No Country for Eight-Spot Butterflies, please feel free to stop by the Coolidge Corner to the Brookline Booksmith. Thank you all for joining us, and we will start the video.
Thrilled, we're really excited you're here. And I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name right. Julian Agawam. Am I pronouncing it?
Yeah.
Okay, feel free to correct me. People get my name wrong all the time. Is the founder of Blue Ocean Law, which specializes in human and indigenous rights, a law firm in Guam, and self-determination and environmental justice in the Pacific. He's a writer, a poet. I have a copy of his most recent book, which you're welcome to come up and take a look at. It's called No Country for Eight-Spot Butterflies, which is full of poetry and essay, and it's a beautiful book. And his work is really at the intersection of indigenous rights, racial justice, climate justice, especially as it relates to threats to small island states and territories. And you can add correct as needed. And I just want to say one last thing, because although we're observing Indigenous Peoples Day on Monday, this is our first formal event at our school, and we're hoping to kind of set the record straight here and going forward. And that as a history teacher, we tend to, if at all, treat Indigenous peoples as something of the past. But as Julian will attest, Indigenous people are present, have always been, are resilient and resistant. And so we're so excited for you to be here. So I'll turn things to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And my deepest apologies again for being late. Hi, everybody. My name is Julian. Can you all hear me well?
Yes.
Great. So I just want to, because we're a little behind schedule, I want to go right into it. I want to do two really, really short readings from the book. Does that sound good? And then we can get right into it. Okay, this piece is entitled Mugu. They say if you take the mugu from a dog's eyes and rub it into your own, you can see the dead. They lied. I know because I tried. After Dad died, rubbed more mugu in my eyes than I care to admit. And that's not the crazy thing. The crazy thing is I didn't have a dog. So I settled for strays. I chased those poor dogs all around the neighborhood because beggars can't be choosers. Because desperation, like belief, is a powerful thing. And because I was 10, I could not yet put 2 and 2 together. I somehow thought if I could see my dad, I could speak to him too. Ask him all my questions. Do you like heaven? Are you and God friends? Do you miss us? Do you miss me? Do you still have a body? Is it chubby like before cancer or skinny like after? What's your favorite food? Mine is cheese. Is yours? Is that because Saka, our family name on your side, means rat? What about Uggan? My teacher said Uggan refers to the family of tubers, as in taros and yams. Why is tuber such a weird word? And how are we related to taros and yams? How exactly? Can you help Mom? All she does is walk around sad and cry in that scary way where she shakes but don't make no sound. Also, she faints a lot. Also, can you help Ria? She don't talk no more. She don't laugh. It's too quiet in the house. Can you come back and make it noisy again? I never saw him, never got to ask him all my questions. The medical term for mugu is rheum, a fancy word for eye gunk, the crust that collects in the corners of our eyes sometimes after a good night's sleep, a natural part of healthy eye function, doctors say, nothing more. But then, doctors don't know everything. This piece is titled More Right. My Aunt Lou told me once that it is easier for our people to believe in magic than it is for others. As soon as she said it, I knew it was true. I knew because that day she'd taken my sister and me, plus 2 of our cousins, to a beach on the northern coast of the island where the sand is shaped like stars. We got lost in those stars. We bent over their tiny bodies for hours, inspecting them as closely as we could without a magnifying glass, wishing we had one, even if only one, even if it meant we had to share. We made star castles. We cartwheeled over constellations. We ran around and fell down on a blanket of stars. We took turns burying each other in a beautiful graveyard of celestial bodies. My aunt's husband, a white man from Australia, explained later that they weren't stars at all, but rather foraminifera, tiny single-celled creatures who live at the bottom of the sea, whose exoskeletons wash ashore when they die. Forum sands, he said. He was right, of course. But my aunt was more right, because eyes wide with wonder is a perfectly good definition of magic. Because magic could just as easily mean stargazing in the midday sun while looking down. Because we had so little, yet somehow we had it all. Thank you so much. Yeah, so those are just 2, I would argue, the shortest pieces in the book. I want to talk a little bit about the sort of the book tour that I've just come off of, and also the book that I've just written. He held it up. This book doesn't have a jacket, but it's called There it is. It's called No Country for AIDS About Butterflies, and I wrote this book almost as a testament to the survival of my people, the indigenous Chamorro people of Guam. Right now, as I speak to you in 2022, my people are bracing ourselves for gigantic social and environmental destruction. The US military, as I speak, is bulldozing the very last remaining pristine limestone forests. So these are forests that took thousands of years to evolve. And these forests are also impossibly beautiful. And now they are being bulldozed in order for the US military to construct a live fire training range complex. And this is a massive live fire training range complex that is going to be used by thousands of US Marines being sent from Okinawa to Guam. One of the 5 ranges is a 59-acre multi-purpose machine gun range. And that is the range that is causing all of the environmental destruction that I write about in this very book. Because there's a host of our other than human relatives, and as an indigenous person, we really take care of our other than human relatives. And one of the species, there's about 23 imperiled species. And when I say that, I mean, these are various species from a fruit bat, which is like a giant, has anyone seen a fruit bat? It's like a giant, like flying squirrel. I don't know for a lot, but it's a fruit bat. It's a slender-toed gecko, a starling, 3 different species of tree snails. So these are really, like, a lot of them, most of them are really, really small organisms. They're really, really small animals. And it's their home. That is the particular limestone forest that is right now being bulldozed. When I left Guam to begin this book tour, the last visit I paid was to this brand new base, and I saw the beginning of the bulldozing. I saw about 20 different machines there, and they all bear the name Caterpillar. And for me, that's when I was really clear that I have to do this national book tour. In part because it's bitterly ironic that the same machines that are ripping out the limestone from the forest floor, these same machines bear the name Caterpillar, but it's actually that exact creature's habitat that they're destroying. So our endemic, which means native, our native and endangered butterfly on Guam is called the Mariana 8-spot butterfly. In my language, she is called the ababang, and she is in the gravest danger of all because she can only lay her eggs on 2 tiny plants. These are like the most delicate little things, and these plants grow in between the crevices of the limestone rock, the same rock that the machines are bulldozing. So right now, what we are seeing is that we have our people, as Indigenous people, we have our ear to the ground, and we are trying to listen, and try to take instruction from her and all of the other sort of life, So you should also know I'm a full-time lawyer. I don't know if that was part of the introduction. I think it was that I founded Blue Ocean Law. So I kind of wear 2 hats. I kind of have two sort of like separate lives. In some ways, I'm a human rights lawyer all day long. I founded Blue Ocean Law in part to fight for the rights of my people, but actually to fight for the rights of Indigenous peoples throughout the Pacific region. So my firm, we have worked on climate change. We have worked on extractive industries. We have worked on actually the national liberation movements of those peoples who are still colonized. We have represented governments, presidents, like we represented the president, like the head of state of various countries in my part of the world. We've represented nonprofit organizations, community organizations. We've worked in Papua New Guinea, Fiji, Vanuatu, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the Federated States of Micronesia, Guam, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, just a ton of jurisdictions. And we, in all of those jurisdictions, we are trying to stop the spread of really, really massive, sort of environmental sort of devastation. I'll just give you sort of one more example and then come back to the butterfly. In the communities of Papua New Guinea that we've worked with, we have been trying with activists to stop multinational corporations looking to mine the mineral wealth at the bottom of the sea. I don't know if any of you have heard of the whole new industry called seabed mining. It's basically this understanding that there is over $8 trillion worth of minerals on the bottom of the ocean floor. But it just so happens that those minerals are almost all of them are located in and around Pacific Island countries' seafloors. So it's all been concentrated in this one part of the world, my part of the world. So we have been working for almost 10 years straight to actually defend the rights of Indigenous peoples who are already experiencing the terrible consequences of this mining. And the mining hasn't even started yet. I'll give you just one specific example of how we do our work. There is a company, it's a Canadian company, that was mining, that was exploring only the waters off the coast of Papua New Guinea. And they were looking for human rights arguments, human rights legal handles to challenge what was happening. So after being in community with all of these people on the ground, we actually discovered something really powerful. That is, there were 3 remote villages off the coast of Papua New Guinea that still adhere or practice the ancient cultural practice of shark calling. Has anyone heard of shark calling? Anyone in the room? Okay, essentially, this is an ancient practice. It's thousands of years old, and it's a rite of passage. You know what that is, a rite of passage for young men in 3 different villages. So what we learned was that the mining company's operations was creating so much dust and so much noise that it was actually chasing, because these are vibrations under the sea. So they are chasing the sharks from their traditional grounds. So what that meant in reality was that the people of those villages could no longer practice their culture, which part of it was shark calling. And with shark calling, I'll give you a very simplified explanation. There are men from certain villages in Papua New Guinea who have been trained. They have a series of chants. You know what chants are? Like these are just chants that they have learned, have been passed down for thousands of years. And they also have a device, like a very sophisticated use of like the coconut shell with bamboo and a third piece of equipment. And it perfectly mimics a school of fish, the shark's favorite school of fish. And so through chants and this device, they go out in the water on their canoes, single bank canoes, and then they lure the sharks from the deep. And then they catch those sharks by hand. By hand. This is like, and it's like, it only happens. This whole cultural practice only happens in one place in the world, and that is in Papua New Guinea, in the precise way that it happens. So these 3 villages were in distress because the old fishermen they are terrified because they don't know what a new rite of passage would look like. This is the test when a boy transitions into a man. This is the quintessential rite of passage, and it was directly imperiled by the operations of this Canadian mining company. So that is sort of the work that we do at Blue Ocean Law. We work to assist Indigenous communities throughout the Pacific fight back. And when I say fight back, I mean fight gigantic corporations as well as their own governments when those governments are betraying their rights, especially their rights over their traditional lands, territories, and resources. So yeah, so that is the work that we do all throughout the Pacific. But coming back to Guam, that is the work that we are doing now. So we have lost too much in Guam, and the 8-spot butterfly is in danger. So we have filed a lawsuit. So 2 things are happening. I'm writing this book, and I'm going on this book tour, sort of educating sort of the American public about sort of the unique harms that are happening that don't have to happen, that we can stop. We can, like, even if the US military wishes to proceed with what it's doing, it can do it in a way that's less environmentally invasive and destructive. So we are doing that kind of work. So I'm doing that kind of work as a writer, but also as a lawyer. We have been filing suits. So what we are doing almost all day long, when I'm not writing at night, in the day, I'm suing people. So that's essentially what we're doing. So we have just won our first major battle. Literally, the news just came in recently about we successfully protected and forced the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, which is a federal agency in the U.S. government that's entrusted with protecting endangered species. We forced them to designate critical habitat for these 23 species. So we just won that Endangered Species Act case. And we're looking at another one. I'll just quickly mention it because that other one, and then of course we can open all of this up. But the other one I want to mention is the humpback whales. I'm not sure to what extent you all know about humpback whales. They're found throughout the world, but in Guam and in the islands due north of Guam, there is a really beautiful nesting area of humpback whales. And so now, starting in the next 2 months, I'm going to be turning my attention with my firm, my team, towards figuring out how to protect those whales that nest in that area, because those are singing whales too. I mean, like this is the reason why I'm really doing this work is I believe every time a species goes extinct, all of us become poorer for it. All of us become more impoverished every time we lose, a species on this planet. And so that is why we're trying to protect these singing humpback whales, because, humpback whales are known for their beautiful songs. And so we are trying to protect them next. But yeah, so that is the work that I do as a writer and as a lawyer, especially with the work with my firm, Blue Ocean Law. And I am definitely happy to open this up to more of a conversational kind of thing, especially you guys. I'm totally free to answer any kind of questions. It's my last stop. I'm in Hawaii.
Kaylee, you can go ahead.
Okay. Hello, my name's Kaylee, and I'm a committee member for this committee, and I'm so happy that you have joined us this evening. And I have the honor of introducing our speaker, Crystal Johnson. So Crystal first moved to Brookline in the mid 1980s. And is an astute energy and environmental leader with more than 25 years of accomplishments in strategic planning, management, policy, research, and assessment of energy, environmental resources, and sustainability. She specializes in energy equity, clean energy workforce development, stakeholder engagement and collaboration, and climate action planning. Crystal applies her creative and critical thinking skills to develop and execute innovative and pioneering sustainable solutions, system planning, and new business models. Highlights of her leadership and strategic thinking include an appointment by the Massachusetts governor to the Energy Facilities Siting Board, named an emerging leader by Boston Business Journal, and named to the YWCA Academy of Women Achievers, as well as awarded a United Indigenous People of the World United Nations Energy Strategy Award. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And please know that there will be some time at the end of the keynote lecture for Q&A with Crystal. Please use the chat or Q&A function for any questions for the speaker. Thank you.
Yay. Thank you so much, everybody. Wonderful. I want to thank the Town of Brookline Indigenous Peoples Celebration Committee and the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations for including me here. So I'm very thankful. So welcome to A Black Indigenous Voice, Advancing Climate Justice with Science, Collaboration, Sacred Conservation, and Human Faith. We'll go to the next slide. As was mentioned, I am Crystal Johnson, and I'm a resident of Brookline since the 80s. Come back and forth a little bit, but this is home area. And I do leverage my 25 years of experience as a senior environmental planner and also as an strategic energy consultant to address climate adaptation planning. And what that means is usually having to think outside of the box, and particularly outside the box regarding engagement. And that's built up from experiences over time where it's just based on how do you engage, how do you communicate, how do you listen, and how do you turn that into better relations. And now it's turned into engagement work that I do, particularly around looking at energy equity, or another term for environmental justice, climate justice. We'll move to the next slide. Wonderful. So it is my hope that my talk tonight and that the conversation that we have afterwards expands each of our perspectives, including mine, especially regarding how we engage and how we connect. And why am I interested in expanding our perspective? It's because this climate crisis that is occurring is not just about the Earth's shift, but it's also an opportunity for us to shift, to expand, to grow, to change, and to be a more authentic and sustainable version of ourselves, which will help us cultivate more authentic and sustainable relationships with all of our relations, yet alone the Earth. So it's my hope that this discussion expands your perspective, nurtures connections in a whole new way. And it makes some assumptions that as a committee, like who am I speaking to? And it's to people who are looking to be sustainable solution, climate action leaders in some way, and connecting with others. And I'm glad to provide a suggested framework based on some of my insight and discuss like what does that look like, and to have some comment about it afterwards. But one thing I first want to clarify is that regarding the climate crisis, I'd like to clarify my perspective. While I'm beyond saddened, beyond the belief of the destruction to the Earth's ecosystem, including what was just shared in that last video, it is my perspective that the Earth, Mother Nature, she will be fine. Our biological life form and the ecological systems that we know will not be. So every contamination and pollution is rooted in something from nature that may have been spliced and altered so that biologically for humans and ecologically for the environment, it's not viable. However, our planet can undo such, but just not in a lifetime or any lifetime that we can truly fathom. But to a planet, what is time? So the earth can slowly undo every ecological mess humanity has created. It can take maybe 10,000 years, maybe a million years, but it will be balanced. So the earth, the planet will be fine. We are just adversely impacting ourselves and all the amazing species and life forms that we share this time and space with. We'll move to the next slide. And the reason I mention that is that just want to remind people that there have been 5 other extinctions on this planet, ranging from 65.5 million years ago to 440 million years ago. And some say there was a 6th extinction already. I think the Holocene extinction. So this may be the 7th, but regardless if it's the 6th or the 7th, it's recognized that it has started to take place from around 2010 to 2080. And that while these 5 extinctions have occurred, there were different life forms, and they were all mostly wiped out, whether it's from 76 to 90% gone. But at the same time, life on Earth started again in a new manner. So if the 6th extinction happens, it hurts us and life as we know it, which is still horrible, but it's the recognition that the earth continues and that this is about us, and wanted to just clarify my perspective on that. So given this, I do want to talk about climate justice with a lens on science, collaboration, sacred connectedness, and human faith. And those are themes that we could talk days about, but I do want to just touch upon them and highlight them. We'll move to the next slide. Excellent. The ancient ways. So let's just take a quick moment to think about our understanding and appreciation of Indigenous and what is Indigenous. It is mentioned that it comes from a Latin word, native to the country, and it's every original people of an area, the initial ancient ways. And in truth, on every continent, there were Indigenous peoples and their practices. However, just now in certain countries are really Indigenous people recognized: the Americas, Australia, Africa, and Asia, the islands and such. But given that we have a group here that is also Caucasian and from European ancestry, I just want to remind them that Europe has an Indigenous people past, whether now it's perceived as a pagan or earth-based people of Europe. Just want to invite you to think about your Indigenous peoples and expand your understanding to what your bloodline is, to acknowledge your Indigenous bloodline of your culture, of your family, and to look at those ancient people's ways, because it would be ironic and interesting to support Indigenous peoples everywhere, but not that of your family line. So as you think about Indigenous, to take a holistic, broader view of what that actually is. So we'll move to the next slide. Climate justice, addressing climate justice. So what is climate justice? Well, what we know is that climate justice acknowledges that the climate change is having different social, economic, public health, and other adverse impacts on different people. It's impacting them differently, physically, yet alone emotionally, yet alone spiritually. But it recognizes that there is a disproportionate impact of adverse issues on low, moderate income and Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. And that happens nationally and globally. And the significance is that these are the people, the places who are least responsible for the problem, yet alone they are bearing the brunt of that environmental issue, which usually becomes a public health issue. And climate justice is the concept that looks at this understanding and then says, wow, what is a fair sharing and the equitable distribution of the benefits and the burdens of climate change and the responsibilities to deal with climate change? It entails representation, inclusion, protection of the rights of who are considered most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. I want to give a little history about the roots of the climate justice. For decades, low, moderate income communities, communities of color, underserved communities have said that they have borne the brunt of environmental issues while being underserved. And that the unsung community activists, I'll say at least from the 70s, a little bit earlier, mostly, I'm going to say Black mothers fought without financial resources and political power to stop municipalities, their communities, corporations from contaminating their backyard. And they excelled through incredible barriers. But from their efforts, environmental racism and environmental justice as new terms were created into the 80s, yet alone the 90s, and created great policy now that we do see nationally, yet alone here. So coupled with the current climate crisis, environmental justice took a deeper meaning. It looked at climate issues that are happening globally, locally, and brought on an equity lens to what's happening with climate change. We'll move to the next slide. Great. As we think about how to support climate justice, I have several different ideas, just want people to think about from collaborative work that I've had to do, always looking at new frameworks of how to foster relations, how to build trust, how to build understanding, particularly if you're taking different people who are passionate and interested in supporting and being allies and moving them into some sort of action, but preparing them for how to approach so that it fosters relations rather than, intentionally or unintentionally offends, or it's not as fruitful, again, unintentionally versus intentionally. And that some of the topics I want to bring up are ones that are important to think about when you talk about climate justice solutions. And it's science, it's collaboration, sacred conservation, and human faith. And as I mentioned before, we could discuss them each for hours, but again, I just want to touch upon them. So we'll move to the first one for the next slide, please. It's addressing climate justice and science. So obviously we know that because of science, technology, it is what helps us understand that the surface, water, and air temperatures rise, human, animal, and plant life responds accordingly. And there's scientific studies that document all these responses. And because of that, science helps build a foundation of understanding how our lives are impacted by climate change and what we can do to slow or reverse changes. And we also know from these studies of data information disparity studies is that communities of color, low income, working class, immigrant communities are more likely to experience environmental hazards, face exposure to pollution, deal with urban heat island effect, have flooding, yet alone other adverse impacts of climate change. But there is a variety of also climate scientists who contribute to climate awareness in a variety of ways, not only with improving our understanding of atmospheric and ocean chemistry or investigating the consequences of climate change, but also in developing energy and carbon mitigation solutions. So there are all many different ways that science serves. And one of the things I wanted to share is that we know that, of course, innovation, we have energy efficient lighting and buildings and vehicles, and they all help to reduce emissions. And so thankfully, because of science, which I'm looking forward to innovation to come in the next few years, specifically regarding water, we have this tool. And also while recognizing that, yes, science technology advances, but also at the same time, it has to be done in a mindful way with a sustainable lens, such as we know from our innovation that we have ample tech gadgets that are made available to us as consumers, and increases more and more energy consumption the more gadgets we have, and it can lead to, based on the energy source of the plants, to more fossil fuels being burned. So while there is this development in science and technology that can definitely help solve current environmental problems, it really must be developed, designed to not create more other different problems, but to align with sustainable values. One of the key aspects that when I think about science and climate justice, and if you're doing some sort of collaborative impact work to assist, is understanding a key tool for addressing climate justice via science, its influence, is the best practice of equity metrics. So what is not measured is not managed, and in fact, it's not prioritized. So, for example, to advance environmental justice, climate justice, using science to help assess data, establish measurable goals and targets, even in small projects looking at EJ of climate justice, because it's difficult to prove that which is not measured. So as you collect and analyze data, measure and report, to ensure you drive a quantitative versus a qualitative approach. Is utilizing data in your engagement efforts, it's more powerful than any type of letter of concern. So looking at what is that equity metric and how can you utilize that with your engagement for making it clear what is happening, what's the disparity, what is the concern. For collaboration, we'll move to the next slide. So collaboration, as we take action and consider what further action to take on climate change, one thing I understand is that it must be collaborative. And it's not just because we are so much better together, but because where we are with environmental justice, climate justice, communities, it is the best solution. However, it seems that typically policymakers, decision makers, more of traditional forms, have not always approached it in a successful manner. Now there are new ways, new procedural ways in environmental climate justice frameworks for making sure that you're lifting the voice, the vision, the ideas, the power of those historically marginalized or underserved communities. However, one of the things I want to provide for great insight is that as you do collaboration, is to ensure it's being done in a culturally congruent manner that empowers that community to lead. Because while collaboration is everything, if that community does not have that capacity to lead, it creates an imbalance, it creates a lack of trust, and it repeats, ironically, some of the issues that have created where other people have come in and made assumptions for that community. So in whatever manner collaboration is advanced, whether it's organization to organization or communities or individuals or other, there must be an understanding discussion of how to start. And that usually is with effective listening. You have collaboration, includes more and more listening. And so as organizations that may be very driven, very robust in their approach, it is understanding how to soften an approach so that you are a convener and you are more of a listener, because this helps strengthen that type of relation. Again, from community, organizations, or such. One model is that you can conduct discussions or surveys, but essentially you need to find out by listening to communities in new ways to understand their experiences, their perspectives, their values, their concerns, and their interests. And from that, it's a starting point for how to incorporate their voice into those sustainable solutions. So the challenge in collaboration is, how do you collaborate without taking over, particularly when there are many dynamics and historic issues and wrongs and cultural dynamics and assumptions. So one must learn to collaborate in a new, different manner and have a strategic approach that allows a community-based organization, that community to lead and stay empowered. Otherwise, the engagement will be lost and it's not successful. And ironically, it repeats in a different way some of the wrongs that had been done to that community, but just now in this new way. So that's collaboration. For sacred conservation, we'll move to the next slide. So what is it? It is an understanding that the earth and humans are entwined and have obligations to each other. And Indigenous practices are such, that awareness. Indigenous practices understand that humans are not here on earth to dominate, nor do we remove ourselves from nature. Rather, Indigenous practices recognize that we should work with, nurture the world that we have. Western thinking does include that some bodies, some places, some species are expendable. Indigenous practice recognizes that all components are part of the whole and have a role and a value. And while I don't want to over romanticize indigenous practices, the indigenous ancient ways of practices does recognize this vital human nature relationship that fosters this sacred connection. So while it's very old, right now it's extremely relevant, and it makes it modern, makes it timeless. Because there's a body of ancient traditional practices and knowledge about natural systems that are thousands of years old, as was just mentioned in the video before, and others, that are still practiced today in some small parts, but typically ignored by public officials and others. So as sustainable solutions are being considered and what needs to be included in community engagement, sustainable solutions, it's looking at that wisdom of sacred connectedness. So you have the valuable Maori seaweed aquaculture experience expanding now. We're seeing the Aboriginal fire management practices that when the bushfires were there, that were solutions, to Native American sustainable water management and historic sustainable managed fisheries. They weren't overfishing. And there's so much more that can be learned from that sacred connectedness to nature, and the reconnection with the sacred in nature, the creative life force, is something key that as you do environmental work, environmental justice work, particularly around climate justice, looking and understanding what is that relation of that community with, how can you expand yourself to understand it more and further. And it's something that is has the potential to open something new in you as you explore that. So you are invited. As we know, Indigenous communities have been fighting since colonization for their inherent right to follow their ways of life on their ancestral lands, sacred sites, and places. It's been a constant part of the protests from the uranium mining, yet on the mining that was mentioned about in the video, to tar sands extraction, water takings, pipeline constructions, and more. Yet, Indigenous voice is still there. It's still here. The Indigenous ecological and spiritual knowledge is a practice of mindfulness. It is not for the weak, for what has been endured. And because of that mindfulness, we have endured. It changes how one interacts with everything. So a sensitivity to such sacredness in nature is powerful, and a lens that is often needed as climate justice, environmental justice work is done. For the next slide, we'll look at human faith. Thank you. So every day that the world leaders delay or falter on their commitment to environmental responsibility, the window to avoid the worst consequences gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And as climate scientists and activists race to get this critical mass of humanity needed to change, society's approach to the climate crisis, faith communities are a significant pathway, because they are a pathway to millions of people nationally, yet alone billions of people globally, and that includes their hearts and their minds. So religious enlistment in climate action battle has been going on, at least for the last 10, 15 years in a more momentous way. And while there definitely is a politicalization of the climate crisis issue, where appealing to people's faith is a possible solution that we've seen work. So connecting faith to climate helps remind people to care about other people, to care about what is happening, and to advocate for action, even if only on behalf of those in need. Because the concepts of being good stewards, of being a caretaker, being responsible for nature, walking lightly upon the earth goes across all traditions. So while many faith-based organizations are looking at their understanding of the climate crisis in relation to their concept of God, whether to help those most vulnerable to adverse impacts or to lead with the theology that we're just all stewards of creation, it is needed. So again, as I mentioned, the politicalization of climate change has limited climate action. It seems that, however, human faith traditions can actually drive climate action. Faith groups are excelling in their ability to remove the climate crisis or climate action discussion from the political arena and approach the climate issue with a moral understanding. And because of that, there's great value and great impact. So looking at, how to use science for metrics, how to have collaboration and culturally congruent new ways that are community-based. You're looking at sacred connectedness, sacred conservation, and learning from that mindfulness practice, and the value then of human faith or faith-based organizations and that moral approach to driving climate action are some sustainable solutions to be used together synergistically for greater impact. So for the next slide, I just want to share is that there's a saying in indigenous traditions, at least for the Cherokee Tusaugis, you walk in beauty. It's your earth walk. And as we're on this planet at this time, and we know that our soil, our water, our air systems are in a crisis. If you're not aware of that, you're in denial. And that coupled with that, our transportation, housing, education, economic system also, yet alone our physical health is in a crisis. Yet despite that, we move forward being solutions oriented and wanted to instill that to ensure meaningful climate justice impact, that utilizing a strategic framework like the model I just suggested as sustainable solutions for the science, collaboration, sacred conservation, and human faith is one opportunity. However, also using that for yourself is something that is also recommended, because the climate crisis highlights just how connected the world is. And on your individual climate action journey, there's an opportunity, as I mentioned before, to be more authentic and a more sustainable version of yourself. And it is my hope that from this discussion, you expand your perspective, that you nurture new connections, new collaborations, and you begin to align with the sacred and or through your faith. And the reason this is so important is because it builds resilience and hope, and it allows for measurable impact. And at this time where we're at, where we know that it's like we're in a bus, it's an analogy, and we know the bus, humanity, is going to be hitting a massive tree, a massive rock, or a wall. But we don't know yet if we're going to be hitting that going 90 miles an hour, or if we're going to hit it going 30 miles an hour or 10. We still don't know yet. How can we change that trajectory so it is 15 miles an hour, or that it skims just the side of the bus versus we hit it head on? And if the people who are in the front may not have airbags, but the people in the back who do have airbags, as an analogy, who gets the worst physically or such? And because we're in this situation now, and we'll all be witnessing, there is eco-anxiety and there are associated mental health issues tied with what's happening with climate crisis. And as an example of how we can say many people did or did not handle COVID, they have no idea what more things will be coming. As a scientist, understanding, wow, there will be more viruses. We haven't even talked about the water issues of soil and such, and not to focus just on that, but also can't deny it, is that having connections with one another, having resilience and hope through all of that is the strongest solution that we can have. So as I bring forth how we can look at science for equity, how you can have connections, how you can have sacredness, how you have faith, it's for the biggest sustainable solution there is. It's you. It's your resilience and it's your hope. So I thank you for this discussion, and would love to have question and answer times with everybody.
Thank you so much, Crystal, again, for taking the time to speak with us tonight. And thank you for everybody who is here in attendance. I also just want to take a quick second to thank the Indigenous Peoples Celebration Committee for putting on this event tonight. Thank the Brookline Community Foundation for allowing us to bring Mr. Julian Agawam to the Brookline High School in October to give that presentation to our students live, as well as to the Brookline Interactive Group who is here tonight recording and live streaming. So I am going to open up now some Q&A. You can either type it in the chat or put it in the Q&A box. We'll take questions or comments. We do have one comment, no question. Thank you. Thank you, Matthew. If there are any questions, you can put them in the chat, raise your hand, however you would like to have your question answered. And I can also take questions from the committee if the committee has any questions. Catherine, go ahead.
Crystal, thank you for that wonderful talk. I was very, very interested in the criteria that you listed, and I was wondering if you could be helpful with equity measures around climate. And yes.
So yes, and I'd love to hear from you, like for what community or what project or what you would be utilizing that you're focused on, because and we can talk offline too, continued, because I gave a paper recently at the ACEEE American Council for Energy Efficient Economy around shaping the future of equity and energy efficiency. And one big discussion was around energy equity. And I had talked with about 6 different leaders in equity and energy efficiency nationwide, gathered some great insight and such, and really learned even more based on my experience with looking at energy equity and such. Worked on projects here in Massachusetts, led by a brilliant woman, Mary Wambui, and what she's been driving around energy equity, yet alone some work in Delaware, also by other thought leaders, Jim Purcell. So there are many different approaches to it if you're looking at equity metrics that way, or if you're looking at disparity studies on some other technical area. Can I ask what it pertains to?
It occurred to me we as a town are having a conversation about things that we could be doing or ought to be doing.
Yes.
Regarding climate change. And some of the solutions are showing up as taxes and punishment and burden. And I was wondering how we could create a framework or as you suggested, metrics that could be measured, that we could talk about in some useful and productive way.
You know, it's not insurmountable, but it is a complex process, particularly when you're talking about, like, what are the programs, what's the policy, what are the models that we need to use, and then how can you measure that or target or goals. So I'd love to talk with you more to get more details about that, but there are opportunities, particularly for it's needed, because if you're going to invest in policy, yet alone invest resources, you do need to make sure it is being measured, it's being monitored, it's being managed, and there's some way to gauge from a baseline, is it working, is it not, or such. So please reach out to me. We can talk further about that in detail, because it's not a quick answer.
Crystal, we have 2 questions in our Q&A. One is from Dean. Crystal, thank you so much. I met you a few times at Pierce with the science fair you organized year after year. Very impressive. Do you have ideas for local chapter environmental groups such as Mothers Out Front? How do we engage more broadly and more effectively with all constituents, not just middle and upper class white women?
I hear you. But I'm also thankful to Mothers Out Front and that demographic of women who are leaders, are thought leaders, are kicking ass, and are driving change. And so, but at the same time, it's even wonderful to say, who can we align with for greater collaboration? And so please do also reach out to me, because it's wondering, like, is it within Brookline, or do you want to partner with other communities? Because I know sometimes when we look at climate justice, it might not, well, Brookline is a diverse economic place, but we may not have the same environmental extreme issues that may be happening in other communities or EJ designated communities. And then we want to partner to help there versus something more in the community. So I'm not sure what you're focusing on, but there are many possibilities, and that collaboration goes further. So you can find other diverse groups, community-based organizations that you want to partner with to broaden both of your perspectives and how to connect, because engagement in multi-sector, where you're looking at, yeah, it's community-based, but how can we have community, can we have nonprofit, you can have the faith-based, you can have businesses, academia, the schools, children, youth, all the work is like, it's got to be everybody. It may seem like it's a large planning task, but ultimately that's the only way it's going to succeed, rather than be isolated in silos. And so there are suggestions, and I'd love for you to reach out also, because again, trying to figure out what you're targeting and such will dictate who and where. But I think it's an excellent suggestion. I don't know if that helps.
We have another question from Anne. What are some, if you know of any, authentic climate justice initiatives going on in Brookline and or Boston, and how can faith communities get involved?
Ooh, you know, I want to commend that the faith institutions around, they vary. Well, one of the things that is actually really great that I would say, from working with the Green Ribbon Commission, which is under the city of Boston, where Boston has some really great climate action planning goals, really since the last 10 years, and helping to have multi-sector organizations lead those sectors. And looked at it like a study to say, like, wow, have they done that? And there's a movement now with faith-based organizations to have, like, what are they looking at, not just climate action planning, but climate adaptation and their greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a new wave regarding what can they do regarding their greenhouse gas reductions and with their constituents, and have a ripple out effect that way, yet alone to partner with others. So there's so many different avenues you can take, from more soft to more robust. And I think at this point, we don't have time to tiptoe, and that we need to be a lot more forward to say, like, wow, what are your climate adaptation planning efforts for that facility organization for faith-based? And then how are you helping your constituents do that, and who can you align with? Those are some of the biggest ones. But in Boston, yet alone in Brookline, there are some, there's the Unity Church. There's some temples that I remember when I had the Gaia report, had interviewed for their leadership and impact work that they were doing, including with their members. So some people are excelling at different rates, some people others, but if you can connect them all, there is the faith, gosh, I think it's Power and Light. I think I'm saying it wrong, but 3,400 faith-based organization leaders signed on to a commitment around climate solutions. And it's just, I think on the East Coast, I could be wrong, it might be larger, for that leadership. So you also have, I think it's Faith, Power, and Light. You have what Green Ribbon Commission was trying to do. You can look at, see what other faith-based organizations are doing to help drive impact into their members, and what those members do at their schools, in their communities, and their homes, and their work. So it's a big ripple out effect, and hopefully that helps. If not, you can email me and we can talk further. And I do a show about that. There's so many great inspirational stories out there. There really are.
It looks like the name is Interfaith Power and Light.
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, that is all the questions we have. I'll give our attendees one more minute to think of a question if they have one. I'm not seeing any, so Felina, I can hand it over to you.
Well, Crystal, I would like to once again thank you for agreeing to be here with us tonight, and to all of my fellow committee members and all of the amazing people who decided to join us here. Caitlin, thank you so much for facilitating, and to the ODICR for allowing us to do this event. I would love to talk to you further myself, Crystal, offline about other things.
That'd be great.
And I hope to see you around in the neighborhood. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, so much.
Bye. Good night, everybody.
Good
Good
night.
night.